Never in my life did I expect to be talking about this town so much. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to La Crosse, Wisconsin. On the morning of January 8th, 2006, around 7 a.m., University of Wisconsin-Madison student Cullen Fortney stumbled into the lobby of Gundersen Lutheran Medical Center at 1900 South Avenue in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was soaking wet and shivering from the cold, but he could hardly explain to the staff why this was. All he could recall is that one minute he was dancing at a bar downtown, and the next he woke up swimming for his life in the freezing waters of the Mississippi. But as the river carried him southward, he was lucky enough to find a concrete slab within reach. He swam towards it, pulled himself up onto shore, and then collapsed. After laying on the banks for a short time, he collected himself, got up, made his way over to the medical center, and then walked in to tell them that he had fallen into the river, but he didn't know why or how. This story caught the attention of retired New York City police detectives Gannon and Anthony Duarte, who are the primary investigators of the yet unproven Smiley Face murder theory. It caught their interest because Cullen was not the first young man to end up in the Mississippi River at La Crosse, Wisconsin, under mysterious circumstances, with at least 4 others having done so between 1998 and 2006. And later in 2006, Luke Homan would join that list. The difference in all of these was that Cullen actually survived what happened to him. Had Cullen perished, he'd have made 6 accidental alcohol-related drownings in La Crosse, Wisconsin in under a decade. To that end, I think that it's best we start this off by recapping some stuff from that first La Crosse video so you can understand why I think Cullen might be connected. And unfortunately, there will be no history segment in this video because we have just covered this area so extensively at this point. Like, I went back and I tried to find something new that we could put into this video about the region, and there was nothing. You know, we had an ad this week, but for reasons outside of our control, it kind of fell through. We thought the better idea would be to advertise our own coffee, and also Steven's Coffee from Stakuyi in the History of Everything, because we have a collaboration package with him. But, you know, of course, if you're going to only order one, it's our opinion you should order ours, though you should never order just one blend of coffee. But the reason I suggest ours is that Mount Pocono Perk was kind of a labor of love for me. I was a barista for 6 years. I learned very well how coffee works, how roasting works, and what I determined was that people who drink extra dark roasts are wrong, Starbucks is terrible, and this is the kind of thing you should be drinking. It's got hints of nuts, cherries, chocolate. It's really probably one of my favorite coffees I've ever had, and I say that as a man who's had probably over 100 different artisanal roasts of coffee. So when I say that I'm recommending this, I'm not saying that because it's just our coffee that we picked off of a shelf on some online store. It's because I sat down with Matt Moore, I told him exactly what I wanted my coffee to taste like, where I wanted my beans from, and we came up with this. And this thing is tasty, and it might burn my mouth in a second. It did. I'm Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge. We first looked at the La Crosse cases back in December of 2023 when we became interested in Luke Homan's death. Luke was in his senior year at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and finishing up a degree in finance. A natural athlete, the 6'3" tall 21-year-old Luke Homan was also a productive member of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse Eagles basketball team. On the evening of the 29th of September 2006, Luke was out with some friends just hitting the bars to celebrate Oktoberfest. He mostly stuck to bars in the area of 3rd and J, with credible witnesses last placing him at The Vibe around 9 p.m. The Vibe was the first bar Luke visited that night, and possibly the only one. There were unconfirmed reports that he was at 2 different bars that night, which were communicated by his basketball coach, Ken Coble. He may have left The Vibe on the 300 block of 4th Street South as early as 9 p.m., and his friends seemed to be unsure if he left before or after they did. After leaving The Vibe, he was allegedly spotted at Coconut Joe's at 128 3rd Street South around 11:30 p.m. Then another person said that they saw him at the library, a bar across the street from Coconut Joe's, between 1 and 2 a.m. And then the last reported sighting of Luke occurred at the Vibe at around 2:30 a.m. During the course of the investigation, police dogs managed to scent Luke, and they followed his trail from the 300 block of South 3rd Street, or 3rd Street South, I should say, to Pearl Street, then to the river's edge in Riverside Park. At this point, they brought out cadaver dogs because they had a general idea of where to be looking, and the dogs had led them right to the riverbank. Those cadaver dogs were brought in the morning of Monday, October 2nd, and they quickly narrowed the search area enough for divers to get into the water and start looking for Luke. A dive team from the La Crosse Area Underwater Rescue Service managed to locate Luke's body about 10 feet underwater and, to quote the news reports, a few feet from the shore. When he was recovered, he was still wearing the same clothes, the same maroon sweatshirt, the t-shirt underneath it, and the jeans that he had been wearing when he went missing, as well as his belt and his shoes. At this point, he was taken to the regional coroner's office in Hastings, Minnesota, without the family being allowed to see the body. In the autopsy report, his decomposition was listed as slight to moderate, although I would argue, based on the recovery photos, that slight is the much better description here. Either way, though, it would make sense given how long he was in the water, about 5 days, I believe, so you wouldn't expect to see a ton of decomposition, especially at that depth, in rather cold water. Basically, those temperatures slow bacterial growth enough that decomposition itself will slow down. The autopsy also showed that Luke had bruises and abrasions to his forehead, biceps, right side, and knuckles, as well as epidermal blisters on his wrists, and 3 scratches and a pressure wound on his forehead, and his blood alcohol content was 0.33. It was likely somewhat lower than that when he actually went into the water, as blood alcohol content will rise after death in drowning cases, so it was probably, closer to between 0.27 and 0.3, but that's still a lot. As for his injuries, those abrasions were red, which means that he sustained them while he was still alive. And if you look at the locations of his injuries, it was determined, and we agree with this assessment, that they could be consistent with a fist fight and then possibly with being dragged. The blistering on the wrists could have been caused by ligatures rubbing against them as somebody was dragged like this. And the bruise pattern on the forehead resembled the toe of a woman's boot. This aspect led us to hypothesize that if something did happen to Luke, if he was attacked, then a woman was likely involved. It also seemed possible that Luke was unconscious when he went into the water, which could be explained by the very high blood alcohol content, and the bindings on his wrists, if that's what those were from, could have been a precaution against him waking up. In addition to that, he also had trace amounts of GHB in his system, though not enough to say for certain whether he had been drugged. As for his clothes, they were a little muddy, he had broken belt loops, and his sweatshirt was speckled with a polish-like orange flecks. And while those could all be coincidences, they could also be consistent with someone being grasped by the shirt and belt loops as they were dragged or tossed while unconscious. So, the combination of extreme intoxication, antemortem injuries, the lack of water in Luke's lungs, his recovery location, and the locations of his wounds all made me a little bit suspicious about the idea that Luke simply fell into the water. And of course, it wasn't that any of these things were inexplicable individually. It was that, put together, all of them at once seemed a little bit unlikely if this were simply an accident. So, if it were just Luke Homan, I would probably write it off as a freak accident. It would just be something weird that happened. But the thing is, it wasn't just Luke Homan. Luke was the 5th drowning death under nearly identical circumstances in La Crosse in under a decade. It seems to have started on September 28, 1997, with a 28-year-old man named Charles Blatz. Like Luke Homan, the 5-foot 10-inch veteran and engineering student was visiting La Crosse for the Oktoberfest celebration. He was last seen at a bar on Pearl Street, and then he was found 5 days later off the 7th Street boat landing. When he was found, he was floating face down, and he had a BAC of 0.31. The next in the list was 20-year-old Viterbo University student and baseball player Nathan Kapfer, who was last seen walking alone down 3rd Street after being cited for underage drinking at Brothers Bar at 306 Pearl Street. This occurred on February 18, 1998, and in Riverside Park, near where it's believed these men went into the water, they found his hat, his wallet, and his citation documents. At autopsy, Nathan Kapfer had a BAC of 0.22. About a year later, on April 11, 1999, 20-year-old Jeffrey Giese disappeared. A student at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, he was last seen at Club Millennium at 121 3rd Street talking to 2 girls. Like the others, he was average to above average in height at 6'2", and he had a high-earning career. He was going to be an engineer. He was found May 24th in Running Slough, part of the Mississippi River, 1.5 miles from where Charles was found with a BAC of .42. And then following this, there are 5 years until we get a similar drowning. 5'9" tall wrestler and UWL student Jared Dion was last seen outside of John's Bar at 109 3rd Street around 2:30 a.m. on April 10, 2004. And then he was found in nearly the exact same location that Luke Homan would be found 2 years later. Also like Luke, his body did not float and he was eventually found by divers. Near the scene, they found his hat hanging from a post, and at autopsy, his BAC was .27. So with all of that covered, let's run through the similarities. Charles Blatz, Nathan Kapfer, Jeffrey Giese, Jared Dion, and Luke Homan were all seen at bars on 3rd Street the night they disappeared, and all 5 were found downriver of Riverside Park. All of them except for Nathan Kapfer were, so far as I can tell, single, which led me to believe that maybe they were going to Riverside Park to meet up with a girl that they had first met at the bars. It's possible that Nathan could be unconnected, he could have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe his relationship wasn't as serious as we were led to believe. Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, the investigators of the Smiley Face murder theory, believe that these are not a series of tragic accidents, but rather a series of homicides. And in their book, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, they say that what they needed to prove this, or at least to make it to the next step of the investigation, was a survivor. And the question we're asking here, the same question that they asked, is could that be Cullen Fortney? Just hours before he pulled himself from the Mississippi River, 21-year-old Viroqua native Cullen Fortney was out with friends at bars on 3rd Street. Unfortunately, there aren't very many personal details about Cullen floating around out there, such as what his field of study was, whether or not he was an athlete, things like that, so it's hard to compare him with the rest of the possible victimology. Very little is known about the events of that night either, as the investigation was rather limited since Cullen was found alive. Most of what we do know about that night comes from witness statements, which tell us that Cullen and his friend Ryan Larson had driven to La Crosse to visit another friend at UWL, Jay Hoffland. According to police reports, Cullen said that he had left John's Bar at 109 3rd Street North around 1:45 a.m. without either Ryan or Jay. After that, Cullen says he remembers nothing until he woke up in the river and pulled himself ashore, after which he says he passed out, coming to around 7 a.m., at which point he walked into Gundersen Lutheran Medical Center. Police didn't have a ton to work with in this case, their only possible lead being an acquaintance of Cullen's named Nick Thompson, who was believed to have been at the same bar that night and showed up in the same hospital that morning. While Cullen walked himself in, it seems that Nick was found passed out in the lobby. Nick Thompson could not recall the events of the previous night any better than Cullen Fortney could, and while he didn't end up in the river, his car somehow ended up not at his house. He had parked it in the lot of Whetstein Electric at 214 Vine Street, and it ended up on the 900 block of King Street. Another similarity between the two men was that they had both been drinking, though to what extent is unclear in Thompson's case. We know that Cullen had a BAC of .04 when he wandered into the hospital. If you do the math here, it suggests that his BAC around 2 a.m. was probably around .163. Initially, the police did consider the possibility of foul play, as did the Fortney family, who on Tuesday, January 10th, 2006, sent an email around to some friends informing them of what had happened to Cullen. In the email, Cullen's mother, Mary Kay, pointed to a few specific issues and then added some more details relevant to the circumstances. To start, it seems that Cullen did not tell Ryan or Jay that he was leaving. This is evidenced by the fact that Ryan and Jay say they stayed out until 5:30 in the morning looking for Cullen. If they knew he was leaving, if they were under the impression that he was going somewhere, they probably wouldn't have looked for him until much later. We also know that Cullen had his cell phone with him that night, and it seems that he was not answering it. Cullen's low blood alcohol content also stuck out to his mother, who felt that at those levels, he should not have been experiencing memory loss, leading her to believe that Cullen may have been drugged. And she was right to be skeptical of that. While .163 is about double the legal limit and the threshold for where you might start to experience blackout symptoms, it won't necessarily cause a blackout in every individual. And in this case, the individual is a 21-year-old man from the drunkest state in the Union. I can only speak to myself, but I do know that if I were At that level, I would not be blacked out. The last thing of note pointed out by Cullen's mother is the fact that his shoes and his jacket were missing, likely lost in the river, and she kind of takes this and leads into saying that she thinks that somebody tried to kill Cullen. The police, on the other hand, were not so sure, and by Thursday, they brought both Cullen and his father Tom in for interviews, and on that same day, they were able to locate Thompson's pickup truck. The vehicle was parked at the corner of 9th and King, about 3/4 of a mile southeast of that Wetstein's parking lot, where Nick thought he had last seen the car. Police pulled CCTV footage from the Wetstein's parking lot, which showed a man getting into the pickup around 3 a.m. And though they said the footage was quote-unquote not sharp, they believed that man to be Thompson himself. Why the car ended up where it did and how Thompson ended up in the hospital, another 1.5 miles to the southwest of there, was not really explained. As for Cullen, when he and his father were interviewed, they managed to narrow down the area where they believed he had gone into the river. While news reports don't say where exactly this spot was, Gannon and Duarte seem to believe that it was somewhere in the vicinity of Needbalski Bridge on Hood Street. Reports of this whole thing are a little bit confusing because some say that this is where he was pulled out, some say that this is where he went in. It seems they were unsure of if he went in, where he came out, all of that. But regardless, on the shoreline, where he led police, they found some of his personal items, but what those personal items were is not revealed. As for the memory loss, when Cullen's urinalysis came back, it showed no signs that he had been dosed with GHB, Rohypnol, or any other date rape drug. Taking all of that into account, police concluded that Cullen Fortney and Nick Thompson's appearances at the hospital that morning were unconnected, and that Cullen had most likely accidentally fallen into the river somewhere near where he pulled himself out. Reports from the immediate aftermath of the case suggest that the Fortneys were happy with the outcome of the investigation, going so far as to quote their spokesman as saying, "The family continues to believe the La Crosse Police Department did an outstanding job on the investigation." Other factors, however, tell a bit of a different story. While this alone doesn't prove anything, when Gannon and Duarte went to speak with Cullen's parents back in 2006, they were told that they just didn't really want to talk about it and they wanted to put the whole incident behind them. Now, while it's totally possible that they legitimately just didn't want to be bothered, Cullen's reaction makes me question that. Gannon and Duarte managed to track Cullen to Madison, and they went to the city, sat down, and asked him to recount that night for them. Cullen said that he remembered dancing at John's bar around closing time, then waking up in the Mississippi swimming for his life, at which point he managed to swim up to a concrete slab and pull himself ashore. Then, once safely on land, he passed out. At this point in the interview, Gannon says that Cullen looked nervous, and that he admitted some people and the police thought I was making this story up. And Gannon said that as he was having the conversation with Cullen, it seemed more like he was talking to a victim than a kid who was just embarrassed about falling into the river. When asked to continue, Cullen said that he awoke after a while and that he heard the sound of the early morning traffic, and that he went towards that traffic, then when he saw Gundersen Medical Center, towards that. So basically he got up and he immediately began looking for help. As for the amount of time between Cullen going into the water and Cullen going to get help, he says he believed he was only in the water 5 to 10 minutes, and then on shore for another 10 to 15, though it must have been hours since I walked into the hospital at 7 o'clock. Once inside, he told the front desk he'd lost his hat, jacket, shoes, cell phone, and $20 in cash, though he still had his wallet. And in my opinion, this is where we encounter the first issue with the police narrative: timing. That's because in order for Cullen to have fallen into the river accidentally because he was drunk, he would have to have gone in shortly after 2 a.m. This is because after 2 a.m., he'd only be getting more and more sober, which means that with every passing hour, the chance he was going to do something that stupid decreased considerably. If he'd gone in any later than 4 a.m., for example, his blood alcohol content would have been below 0.12, making it unlikely that he would just simply stumble his way into the river any later than this point. And that's important because in freezing cold water, hypothermia takes hold in just 15 minutes or less. And with air temperatures being just as low, 32 degrees, Cullen would have been unable to warm himself up. This means that he would have died in 30 to 90 minutes. So if Cullen had fallen into the 32.5 degree water at any point between 2 and 4 a.m., he would have succumbed by 5:30 a.m. And he would have likely been unconscious or immobile for some time before that. This means that Cullen must have gone into the water no earlier than 6 a.m., otherwise he would not have survived. The problem with that is that if he went in after 6 a.m., then his blood alcohol content would have been below 0.06, making him legally sober enough to drive and therefore very unlikely to fall into the river. And this brings us to the next issue here: memory. Memory loss is already iffy at 0.163 BAC, and it only becomes more and more unlikely as you sober up. Even if Cullen blacked out at 0.163 around 1:45 a.m., he should have been coming back to consciousness by 3 a.m. when his blood alcohol level dropped to just 0.14. At the very least, he should remember falling in, and then also anything immediately preceding that. Things such as how he got there, and was he with anybody when he went into the water. But Cullen didn't remember anything before waking up in the water, which means that one of three things must have occurred. He was drugged at the bar, he entered a fugue state, or he simply lied about not remembering. Now, the only reason I can think he would lie is if he jumped into the river on purpose and was embarrassed about the situation. But I can't for the life of me fathom why somebody would jump into freezing cold water when they had no history of mental illness or suicidal ideation. As for fugue states, those are typically brought on by a traumatic head injury, like in the case of Danny Philippitis, or some other sort of mental trauma or severe mental illness. Cullen had none of these. That just leaves drugs, and while Cullen's tox screen may have come back clear, GHB could have slipped by unnoticed. GHB is a commonly used date rape drug, which can cause, among a laundry list of other unpleasant symptoms, memory loss, short-term memory loss specifically. It can also cause slurred speech, feelings of confidence or excitement, a heightened sense of touch, and increased libido, making it difficult to distinguish from the effects of alcohol intoxication. And that makes it kind of a perfect storm for anyone looking to use GHB, because alcohol increases the drug's potency. And the reason I bring this up, even though the tox screen didn't show GHB dosing, is because a 2008 study published in the Journal of Analytical Toxicology found that in 81.3% of samples tested 6 to 12 hours after ingestion, levels were indistinguishable from that which your body endogenously produces. And what I mean by the levels that are produced endogenously is that your body naturally produces a small amount of GHB. The way that this study was performed, people would be dosed with GHB and then monitored to see how much was remaining in their system over a period of 24 hours. By 12 hours, in 81% of samples, the amount of GHB was indistinguishable from that which the body naturally produces. But the key here is that in samples taken 3 to 6 hours after dosing, 12.5% were below endogenous levels. This means that 1 in 8 people dosed with GHB will clear it from their system in the time between Cullen's loss of memory and when he showed up at the hospital to be tested. And if they used a slightly lower dose than what was used in the study, it would clear even faster. And then there's the fact that Cullen was able to immediately seek medical attention, which brings us to the last issue I wanted to touch on: location. When Cullen left John's bar, if he were heading back to Jay's place as he intended to that night, he should have been heading to the 400 block of 20th Street South, 1.7 miles to the southeast, and a straight shot down Main Street all the way to 20th. If Cullen wasn't drugged and he had only drank to the point of being twice the legal limit, this route should not have been a problem for him. We also know that he had his cell phone on him that night, and if he had gotten lost, he could have called for help. Since we know that Ryan and Jay were out looking for him that evening, had Cullen called for help, it's almost certain they would have answered. Something that could explain the fact that Cullen left suddenly and walked in entirely the wrong direction is if he met a girl. His loss of memory can then be explained if this girl slipped him GHB, especially if it was a lower than, expected dose. This is also supported by the fact that, in addition to Cullen, there seems to be another person who was possibly dosed with GHB at John's bar that very same evening: Nick Thompson. As you recall, when Thompson's truck went missing, the police pulled CCTV footage that showed a man getting into the truck around 3 a.m., and the police just kind of claimed that this man was Thompson himself. From there, it must follow that it was Thompson who drove the pickup truck from Wetstein's at 214 Vine all the way down to 9th and King, and then he must have walked to Gundersen's, where he passed out in the lobby. This conclusion is not without issues, considering that the truck was not near Thompson's home, nor was it near Gundersen Medical Center, and Thompson could not recall driving it at any point after he had driven to the bars. In order for it to have been Thompson, he has to have driven 3/4 of a mile while blackout drunk, while hitting nothing, and also, breaking no traffic laws that would have gotten him caught by a camera or a police officer, gotten out, and then walked 1.15 miles in a totally different direction to the hospital. Not impossible, but also not really what you'd call likely. A couple of more likely outcomes would be that Thompson is either lying about what happened that night, or he was not the one driving the truck. Taking all of the evidence into account, it's my opinion that Cullen must have gone into the water after 6 a.m., that based on his blood alcohol content, he should remember falling in, and that the memory loss along with his location suggest his being drugged. A reasonable scenario here could be that Cullen met a girl, accepted a drink laced with GHB, agreed to go back to her place, was held somewhere until 6 a.m., and was then dumped into the river to drown. The involvement of a female perpetrator is very likely in my opinion, partially because most single men don't really need a ton of convincing to leave the bar with an attractive woman, and a sober-looking woman escorting a very drunk-looking man is not going to draw a ton of attention the way that the opposite roles would. It also provides an easy way out, as the assailant could at any time switch roles to portray the victim as the attacker. A partner seems possible, if not probable, considering how hard it would likely be for an average-sized woman to move an unconscious man, let alone restrain a conscious and panicked one. And this partner could be either male or female, it's hard to say which based on the evidence at hand. Whatever the case, I don't think that this was the perpetrator's first attempt, and I think it may have been their first failure. Crosse is a focal point of the smiley face murder theory, and that's actually how I became aware of these cases. And while I do have mixed feelings about the overall Smiley Face Killer's concept, I am becoming more and more convinced that during this period in Crosse, something was going on. If Cullen had drowned that night, he would have been the fifth of 6 college-age young men to die under nearly identical circumstances in just 9 years. All 6 of these incidents occurred during the school year, all subjects were seen at bars on the 100 block of 3rd Street, all ended up downriver of Riverside Park, and all were Caucasian men in their early 20s. Cullen differed from the rest of them in one small but potentially crucial way. He was nowhere near as intoxicated. All other potential victims were between just under 3 times the legal limit at 0.22 and just over 5 times the legal limit at 0.42. With Cullen at just 0.163, his attacker may have underdosed him, resulting in his ability to snap out of it when he hit the water. Because of everything that we covered in this and the previous La Crosse, Wisconsin video, and in light of the ongoing Riley Strain situation in Nashville, it is my opinion that there is enough evidence to warrant a serious investigation by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who have looked at this case in the past, but ultimately wrote it off as a series of unconnected accidents. Now, I'll be getting to the broader Smiley Face Killers thing in a second, but I did want to take this opportunity to quickly give a couple of comments on the Riley Strain case. First, I would like to apologize for an error in the original Riley Strain video that we did. During the segment where we talked about the first set of CCTV clips to capture Riley, I said that it looked like the camera froze, like the clip just froze and then suddenly Riley's on the ground. Then, in the video that we actually put out, we had a clip where it doesn't freeze at all. Riley just obviously falls onto the ground. The reason that my narration did not match what was on screen is that Aiden did a better job finding clips of Riley Strain on CCTV than I did while researching.
It's also entirely on me as well, because my standards for what CCTV footage were a little bit unrealistic, considering I thought that some small glitches were what he was talking about, and so I had no reason in my head to check with him, so it's very much on my end too.
Thank you for sharing some of the blame, baby.
I can't let you take the fall for something that's half my fault as well.
I also apologize that in attempting to fix that little error with the limited tools given to us by YouTube, it seemed to have caused the second half of the video to desync the audio. We can and will do better. I would also like to add that while it's very possible that Riley sustained some sort of head injury when he tripped and fell there, I don't think that that necessarily has any bearing on what ultimately happened to him. Because I think the crux of the issue is we have this camera footage from right before he hits a completely fenced area of that trail. Basically, the last point that Riley is seen, from any point onward, he would have had to climb over a chain link fence to get down to the river. And if you look at this spot, it's not a gentle slope down to that river. This is, a few degrees from being a cliff. So even if he did sustain a head injury when he fell, I don't think that head injury is what caused him to go into the river. Specifically, he said that it tasted like barbecue sauce. This report comes directly from his mother, who believes that his drink may have been laced, and GHB would be a candidate for the lacing agent given its slightly soapy and salty taste. And since the effects of GHB pretty closely mimic the effects of alcohol intoxication, it's possible nobody would have caught on that Riley wasn't just drunk. Of course, it's possible that Riley was just the victim of an unfortunate accident, and I believe we need more information before we can come to a conclusion. We'll be keeping you guys updated on the Riley Strain case as it moves along, but for now, we believe that what we need to do is urge caution while avoiding speculation. So, with the quick update on the Riley Strain situation, I also wanted to give you guys an update on where we are with our overall Smiley Face Killer's investigation. Since we started looking into the Smiley Face murder theory back in November of 2023, we've had a chance to look at about half a dozen of these cases. 4 of those only had one potential victim, while 2 of them looked like they were perhaps a cluster. To go over the basics of the Smiley Face murder theory, it really focuses on 2 things, and those are victimology and symbology. In terms of victimology, we're typically looking at white men between the ages of 20 and 30 who are athletes, who are in high-earning careers or studying to be in high-earning careers, and who are generally well-liked and successful. These men almost always go missing after leaving a bar, or at the very least, after drinking. And then the last bit that's consistent across the board is that they are always found in bodies of water. Sometimes they're found within a week, sometimes they're found after several months. As far as symbology goes, it's pretty limited to these smiley faces that Gannon and Duarte say they keep finding in reference to these deaths. In some cases, it is spray painted on a wall nearby. In other cases, it's carved into a plank of wood. In the case of Todd Geib, a smiley face was found on his gravestone. However, it seems that the smiley faces are not present at every single scene, nor can it really be determined that the smiley face was put there in reference to the murder. Now, out of the half-dozen situations we've looked at over the past 6 months or so, it's my opinion that Todd Geib, Brandon Swanson, Tommy Booth, and Brian Schaefer are all isolated incidents. Tommy Booth was definitely murdered, I don't think there's any question about that, but we believe that it was either by a group of friends or by the people that group of friends worked for. Brian Schaefer seems to have disappeared on purpose due to a sense of dissatisfaction with his life and his future. Brandon Swanson may have been killed or kidnapped, but if he was, the MO is very different from the rest of these. He disappeared from a rural road miles and miles from where he was last seen. And in the case of Todd Geib, while his manner and cause of death were nearly identical to those in La Crosse, Wisconsin, he appears to have been held for several weeks rather than several hours. He's the only example of this happening in the area, and it was in a rural rather than urban setting. What I think actually may be related are the string of deaths in La Crosse, Wisconsin from 1997 to 2006, and then another in Pittsburgh, which may have taken the lives of 4 young men between the years 2011 and 2023. All 4 potential victims in Pittsburgh were 22 to 25 years old, disappeared after dark, were last seen by the Three Rivers Heritage Trail, and were recovered from the Ohio River between 2 and 4 months after going missing. All were also drinking at bars that night, were single so far as I could tell, had not expressed feeling depressed or suicidal, and were on foot. There are more details in our video on this specific set of cases, but I will say, in my opinion, these seem less likely to be connected than those in La Crosse. They also don't totally match the La Crosse MO, which could be a result of a change in environment, but also could indicate a different perpetrator or could mean that they're just not connected. That's why I'm not sitting here telling you there's a serial killer in Pittsburgh. I'm just telling you I think an investigation is warranted. In addition to that, and I'll preface this by saying I've yet to corroborate these claims, but I have received communication suggesting that the FBI, as well as the Pittsburgh Police Department, both believe there may be a serial killer operating in Pittsburgh, but they're not sharing that with the public. Like I said, have not been able to corroborate that yet, but that is a thread that we're following. Overall, I think we need to gather more information before we can conclude in any direction whether or not these are connected deaths in various cities. And as for the smiley faces, while I think that there is a possibility of a smiley face killer, I don't think that the smiley faces are nearly as important as they're being made out to be. I think that those are just coincidental being found in the area. Of course, we're going to continue looking into more and more of these so that we can eventually give you something that's not just, here's what we know. We'd like to eventually be in a position to give you a, here's what we think. Of course, you guys have been following along with us for several months now, so maybe you have thoughts. We would love for you to comment them. Tell us what you think. Maybe you think we missed something. Maybe there's something that we got wrong. Maybe you're a local to the area and you have an anecdote that you can share. Whatever it is, please let us know in the comments. And if you have information that you don't want to post publicly but you want to share with us, you can always send it to our email, thelorelodge@gmail.com. If you'd like to directly support what we're doing here at the Lodge, you can subscribe to our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. Those are both linked in the description. Becoming a member in either of those ways will get you access to our new and improved Drunk Lore Lodge streams, which we haven't done one yet. So we'll see how that goes. But Aiden and I are going to sit down with a drink and a dream and see how things roll. If you want to see the actual recorded, edited versions that we've done in the past, those are all available on Patreon, and you can get access to those for just $1 a month. It is the cheapest way to get access to Lore Lodge exclusive content. If you'd like to catch Aiden and I having live discussions without the drinks, you can do that every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Every other week we have a guest, and the weeks that we don't have a guest, we just sit and chat about what we talked about the last 2 weeks. Most recently, we had Roanoke Gaming / Roanoke Tales, and we talked about the biology of Bigfoot and if that's such a thing that could even be possible. You can also drink the Lodge by going to TableauRoastingCo.com and getting Mount Pocono Perk, our proprietary coffee blend that I myself, a barista of many years and the son of a coffee shop owner, designed. Tableau is a small artisan roaster down in Lexington, Kentucky. You're not getting anything that I picked off of a white label service. Matt and I sat down and we designed the coffee we wanted. You can also get one from Stakuyi. Speaking of people named Matt that we work with, we've gone over to Bunker Branding for our merch, and we're currently waiting on them to finish up our designs. We are very excited, and we will be launching those as soon as we have them. In the time being, there's a little shop listing underneath this video on YouTube. That's where you can get our old school merch. That will be gone soon. This is your last chance to get shirts that say things like, what's the one say? I am trapped inside a prison of flesh or something.
I believe so,
Yeah, my bones are hatching. We also have several other channels that sometimes have content. Those are the Weird Bible, which should be back every last Thursday of the month. We also have my personal channel at the Aiden Mattis, or just Aiden Mattis here on YouTube, where I stream 3 nights a week, typically Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And that's usually a music or a co-op campaign gameplay on Tuesday, reaction streams on Thursday, and then we play Helldivers on Friday, but you know, we drink and dive. We also have a couple of other channels, the Lore Lounge and the History Hut. Those don't have content right now, but we're trying. And the absolute best place to get updates on all of this stuff is our Discord, which you can join by going to bit.ly/jointhelodge. All of that said, I am Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge.